There are thousands of Blender tutorials on YouTube, but if you are a modder, most of them will waste your time, because they teach you things you will never need. In this series, I'll show you exactly what you need to know about Blender to create assets for Farming Simulator. Nothing more, nothing less. And in this first episode, we'll start at the very beginning, the absolute basics. Hi, I'm Nadine, and welcome to Blender for Modders, a series made specifically for Farming Simulator modders who want to use Blender to modify game assets and create their own. In this episode, we'll get Blender set up, I'll walk you through the interface, just the parts that actually matter for modding, and by the end, you know how to navigate the viewport, transform objects, and do basic mesh editing. That's the foundation for everything that comes next in the series. So let's switch to my computer and get started. First things first, let's make sure you have Blender installed. Head over to blender.org and there to download. Get the latest version. As of recording this, that is Blender 5.1. Download it, install it, and then you are ready to go. One more thing before we dive in. Blender is very keyboard shortcut heavy. You can find most commands in menus somewhere, but that is slow, and also the shortcuts are often more powerful. I really encourage you to learn the shortcuts. In this series, I'll always show you the shortcuts, and I have a free shortcut cheat sheet you can download. The link is in the description. But on the other hand, don't be obsessed with the keyboard shortcuts. If something is easier or better with the mouse, do it. When you open Blender for the first time, this is what you see. It looks overwhelming. You have all these different tabs, and additionally these menus and buttons. But as a modder, you only need to know a few of these areas. For now, the three areas that matter are the 3D viewport, the outliner, and the properties panel. That is generally all you need to get started. Let's start with the most important area, the 3D viewport. That is the big area in the middle of the layout tab. This is your main workspace. Everything you build, every asset you model, happens right here. Think of it as your virtual workbench. First, you need to know how to move around. Navigation in Blender feels a bit unusual at first, but you get used to it quickly. Hold the middle mouse button and move your mouse to orbit around the scene. This is how you rotate the view. Hold Shift and the middle mouse button to pan. That moves the camera sideways without rotating. And scroll the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. That's it. Those three things are 90% of navigation in Blender. Of course, there are more options, but we will cover them later. There are a few settings which I like to change for navigation. Let me quickly show you. Open the Preferences in the Edit menu, and there go to Navigation. Here, I like to set the Orbit Around selection. That always makes the selected object the center of your rotation. And I check the Depth setting. That makes you zooming aware how far an object is away when you zoom. If it's far away, it will zoom quickly, and if it's near, it will zoom in smaller steps. And finally, Zoom to Mouse Position will zoom to wherever your mouse pointer is. I find that very handy, but of course, it's only a setting. Try it and then set it to your liking. The top right of the viewport shows the axis in relation to your current view. The filled circle with the letter shows the positive direction of each axis, and the ring shows the negative direction. When I rotate the view, it changes accordingly. There is one important difference between Blender and the Giants editor that trips up a lot of modders. In Blender, the Z-axis is the vertical axis, Z is up. But in the Giants editor, the Y-axis is the vertical axis. This affects how you orient your models when building for FS25. Keep this in the back of your mind. We will come back to it when we talk about exporting. On the left and right of the viewport, you have additional menus. Press T in the viewport to toggle the toolbar on the left. This gives you quick access to custom tools. Let's start from the bottom of the toolbar. This button with a cube and a plus sign will create new primitive shapes for you. Click it, and then, when you hover over a surface, it shows a grid aligned to that surface. When you click and drag with the mouse, you can create a new shape. The first drag will create the 2D base of the shape, And when you let go of the mouse button, it will then allow you to make 3D. Click again to finish the shape. This allows you to already build some building block-like structures. Let's create a few more. Left Ctrl allows snapping the object to an existing object. First press Ctrl, then hover over an object, and there you will get a small symbol, what you will be snapping to. Then start dragging the base, and if you still hold Ctrl at that point or press it again, you can also snap the second point. And then let go of the mouse button to make it 3D, and if you press Ctrl again after you created the base, you can also snap the third point. While you drag out a new shape, have a look at the status bar. There, Blender tells you what options you have for the current command. There you see that we can also use Alt and Shift for special effects. If you press Alt while you are dragging a shape, it will grow the shape in both directions. So you're dragging from the center. And if you press Shift while dragging, it will lock the aspect ratio of the shape you are creating. If you want to cancel a shape, hit Escape. This status bar info is a general thing in Blender. For a lot of commands, you have extra options when executing them, and Blender will show these options in the status bar. You can also combine the commands. For example, if I want to create a new cube, which is exactly in the middle of this one, and is also square, I can use Ctrl to find the middle. Then I start dragging, release Ctrl and press Alt instead to drag from the middle, and also Shift to lock the aspect ratio. Let go of the mouse button, and then drag the third dimension. If you look at the button in the toolbar again, you can also check the tooltip. This gives you some additional info about the options. But I want to focus on this small arrow now on the bottom right. This tells you that there are more commands behind this button. If you click and hold with your mouse, you see it brings up additional shapes which you can create with this button. Let's create a cylinder now. I want a cylinder from the middle of this surface, so I hold Ctrl, find the middle, start dragging, press Alt to drag from the middle and also Shift to lock the aspect ratio, and then click. After you completed this command, you can see a small pop-up menu at the bottom left. This is only available after you just completed the command, and it often lets you make additional settings. By default, the base of the cylinder is 32 vertices, but you can still change that now. You can either fill in a number, or you can also drag with the mouse. You cannot go below 3, obviously, because then it wouldn't be 3D anymore, but you can use 3 to create a prism. I will use 6 for a hex shape. The keyboard shortcut for creating a primitive shape is Shift-A. That works a bit different. With Shift-A, you get a pop-up menu where you can select the object you want to create. Let me choose Mesh and then Cube. But the difference to the primitives in the toolbar is that the objects are created with a standard size, which you can then tweak in the small pop-up which comes up after the command. And as you can see, the Shift-A menu has a lot more options than the toolbar. I'm not saying one or the other is better, they are just useful in different situations. That all sounds very complicated, but once you did it a few times, you quickly get the hang of it. I really encourage you to follow along in Blender while watching this video. This is how you will get the most out of it. You learn by doing it multiple times. You don't learn by only watching. The absolute best you can do is to first watch the video fully to grasp all the ideas, and then watch it again while following along and use the new knowledge to create something yourself. When I learned Blender, I did that with a paid course from CG Fast Track. I put the link in the description. And it was his general concept that you first watch, then follow, and then create your own. And I love this concept. It helped tremendously to learn this stuff. The next tool in the toolbar is the Measure tool. I will not explain it in such detail as the last one, because you will quickly see that the concepts repeat. The Measure tool does exactly what it says. It allows you to measure distances and angles. Simply drag from start to finish, and it will show you the distance. Let's view the tooltip to check additional options. Okay, we can use Shift to measure thickness. Let's try this. Drag and then press Shift. Then it will show you the thickness of the objects you hover over. See, 2 meters. Ctrl allows you to snap. So if I want the exact length of the edge of this hexagon, I can press Ctrl before I start dragging, find the snap point, drag and still hold Ctrl, and find the snap point for the end. Now I measured the edge. We can remove a ruler by selecting it. You click when your mouse pointer changes to this diamond shape, and then press X to remove this ruler. We can also measure an angle with this tool. Let's say I want the angle between the edges of this hexagon. In this case, I have to draw a measure between the two edges which I want to measure. I can also change my existing measure to do this. If I hover over the endpoint of the measure, I can grab and drag it. I use Ctrl to snap it somewhere on the edge. And then I can drag out a new point from the middle and snap that to the corner with Ctrl. And then it shows that the two edges have an angle of 120 degrees. But there are some options which are neither listed in the tooltip nor in the status bar. For example, while dragging out a measure, you can press X, Y, or Z once to make the measure go in one axis direction only. For example, if I want to measure how far this corner is away from this corner, but only in the Z direction, I can Ctrl snap the start point, drag it, and then press Z once while dragging, and then the measure goes in one direction only. Then I Ctrl snap it to the other corner. In this case, the snapping will not snap to the complete location of that corner, but only the Z value. You will see these additional axis selections come back in a lot of places. That's a general concept in Blender. The next entry in the toolbar is Annotations. That allows you to do just this, create annotations. So you can draw in the viewport without affecting existing objects. By default, the annotations will be made on the view plane of your 3D cursor. That is the red and white circle here in the middle. We will come to that shortly. So you see, if you want your annotations to be on the object, you can change that in the N panel under Tool. Press N, then you see this menu. The N panel is an additional menu panel which changes based on what tool you are working with and in which mode you are in. It also contains transform values and view settings, and a lot of add-ons live here. Also the Giant's i3D exporter and also my i3D importer, which we will use later. For the annotations, you can change here under Tool that you want to draw on the surface instead of the 3D cursor. The annotation tool also has options to draw lines and polygons, and you can erase your annotations. If you are working on your own, I don't find the annotation tool very useful, but if you are explaining something to somebody, it's definitely useful. So you will definitely see me use this in this series. The next 4 buttons belong together because they are very similar, and they will also look familiar when you have worked with the Giants editor before and followed my basics tutorial for it. In case you didn't, I will put a link in the corner. The first button of this group is the Move tool. This will display the 3 axes at the origin point of the selected object. You can drag them to move the object. The next tool is the Rotate tool. This will display circles to rotate the object. And then we have the Scale tool, which can change the size of the object by dragging these small cubes. Finally, the Transform tool is a combination of all the others, which combines most of the functionality. Depending on where you grab with the mouse, you can either move, rotate, or scale. The keyboard shortcut to the entries in the toolbar is Shift Space. This will bring up a small menu where you can either select with the mouse or type another key to access the command. If I press M now, it will bring me to the Measure tool again. And Shift Space and then G for grab will open the Move tool. But you can access the transformation tools also without these gizmos. Let me go back to the normal box selection in the toolbar. That's the top button here. And then I select one of these objects here. Now I press G on the keyboard and I can move the selected object around without the gizmo. If I want to restrict this movement to one axis, I press X while the movement is already active, and then a highlighted X-axis appears and I can move the object along this axis. I can also define that I want to move the object by exactly 3 meters when I type 3. I can also restrict the movement to a plane by defining which axis I do not want to move the object. G and then Shift Z will allow the object to move in X and Y, but not in Z direction. You can see that by the axes which are highlighted, so you see the green Y-axis and the red X-axis. And finally, if I type G and then the axis twice, I can move the object in its local space. Because this object is rotated, its internal X, Y, and Z axes are different, and G plus XX will move it in this direction. If you want a finer movement for more precision, you can hold down the Shift key while transforming the object. That is the precision mode, and then you see it moves a lot slower. As I told you, the shortcut version of the grab tool is not only faster to access, but it also has more options. The same applies to the rotate and scale tool. You can call rotate by pressing R, and then you have the same options with the grab tool. You can restrict it to an axis, X, Y, or Z. You can use it in local mode by pressing double, X, Y, or Z. And you can enter a number for a defined rotation. So RX90 will rotate the object by 90 degrees on the X-axis. Same for scale. You call it with the S key. And also here, the axis selection. You can duplicate an object by pressing Shift D. With this shortcut, the selected object or more selected objects are duplicated and you are immediately in grab mode to move them somewhere else. There, you can also use all the other grabbing options like limiting to an axis, setting the distance. Be aware, if you cancel the movement of a duplicated object by hitting Escape, you still duplicated the object, but it is in the same place as the previous object, so you can't see that it is duplicated. If I now grab it again and move it, you see that the duplicate is still there. This kind of thing can quickly lead to issues later on, so be careful. If we check the Item menu in the End panel now, we can see our rotation and scale values. Mostly, you don't want your objects to stay this way because that can cause problems later on, and also when exporting them in the Giants editor. In these cases, you will want to apply these transforms so that the rotation and scale becomes a part of the object. In the Giants editor, this is the Freeze Transformations menu, and in Blender, this is called Apply Transforms. The shortcut for this is Ctrl A. This brings up a pop-up menu where you can select which transforms you want to apply. You can find the same menu also in the Object menu under Apply. When I apply the rotation now, the object doesn't move, but the rotation is set to 0. So this is our new basis. This is a very important concept. Whenever you are having issues with something in Blender which does not react to a command as you would expect, it is very likely that it has to do with transformations which have not been applied. The origin point is the pivot of your object. This is a small orange dot. The location, rotation, and scaling is based on this point. The origin is also the reference point for the Giants editor. You can change the origin of an object to where you want it, but we will come to that later. The second button from the top of the toolbar is the 3D cursor. The 3D cursor is this white and red circle which always exists in your scene. It is not a geometry, but a helper object. When you click this button and then click somewhere in your scene, you can place the 3D cursor where you want. And then you can use this position for other things. For example, if you select an object and then press Shift-S, a radial menu comes up where you can select Selection to Cursor. And this will move the selected object to the cursor. There are a lot of commands in Blender which can work in relation to the 3D cursor. But more often than not, at least for me, you will probably move the cursor in Blender accidentally. If you press Shift and right mouse button, this is the shortcut which will bring the cursor to where you clicked. You can also drag it. But Shift and right mouse button in the Giants editor is the command for zooming. So if in any case you mix up the shortcuts for navigation between Blender and the Giants editor, this can happen. To reset the 3D cursor in this case, press Shift-S to bring up the radial menu again, and select 1 or Cursor to World Origin over here to bring it back. The top button on the toolbar is the selection. We use it already, but it also has some additional options. The default is the box selection. When you click an individual object and then hold Shift and click the next object, you can select multiple objects individually. Notice that one of the objects in the selection has a lighter color than the others. This is the active object. It's always the last object which you selected. This will become important later when we work with parent-child relations, for example. If you want to select some objects which are near each other, you can also drag a box, and they will get selected. You can also use Shift to select more objects and add them to the selection, or Ctrl and drag a box around the objects to remove them. Without the Shift and Ctrl shortcuts, you can do the same by selecting the modes on top of the selection tool over here. Choosing the Extend mode will add new objects where you drag a box, and the Subtract mode will remove them from your selection. You get the idea. When you click and hold the selection button in the toolbar, you can switch to Select Circle. This allows you to kind of paint your selection by clicking and dragging with the mouse to select. Please note that you have to hover over the origin of the objects for them to be selected. You can also change the size of the selection circle here. And you also have these options to extend or subtract from the selection. The last option here is the Select Lasso. This allows you to draw a free form instead of a box to select objects. And lastly, here is the Tweak selection. This mode has a built-in Move command. If you click and drag an object while the Tweak selection is active, you will move the object. You can use the shortcut W to switch between the different selection modes. With this knowledge, we can already build something simple, like a table, for example. Let me delete all those objects so we can start fresh. I press Shift-Space to bring up the toolbar menu, and then 9 to create a shape. Then I draw a tabletop flat surface. And then I look from below and create a new small rectangular shape where I use Shift to make it square. And then I drag it downwards to make a table leg. Then I press W to go into normal selection mode again. I duplicate the leg with Shift-D and move it over on the X-axis to the other side of the table. Then I select both legs, duplicate them both, and move them over to the other side of the table on the Y-axis. Move them back a bit, and we have a table. A very simple one indeed, but remember, it's all about trying things out. You can do a bit more to make it more detailed. However, don't go crazy with what you can create this way, because mostly there will be more elegant ways to achieve the same result, often with less work. But we will get to that. If you learned something new so far, please consider leaving a like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you. Up here in the top right corner, you have the outliner. If you have worked with the Giants editor before, this will look very familiar. It's similar to the scene graph. It shows you all the objects in your scene in a hierarchy, and you can organize them here. But in Blender, everything is sorted alphabetically, and there is no option to change that so far, while in GE, you can organize the scene graph manually. You can also use the outliner to select objects, and you can do different sorts of hiding objects with the outliner. The most important for you is probably the eye. This hides an object in the viewport. You can also shift-click the eye of the collection to hide all the children. On the right side, below the outliner, you find the Properties panel. This is where you find the settings for your objects, your materials, your modifiers, collisions, basically everything that affects how an object looks and behaves. Again, it's similar to the Attributes panel from the Giants editor, but it covers a lot more, also materials, for example. We will spend a lot of time here in future episodes, but not today. Now, down at the bottom, you see the timeline. That is for animation, and as a modder, you will not need it that much. Let's get rid of it. If you have not come across it yet, Blender's interface is highly customizable. All building blocks we looked at so far, the viewport, the outliner, the properties, are all flexible areas. That confused me a bit when I was starting out. Every Blender tutorial I watched looked slightly different from what I had on my screen. Different panels, different layouts, it was confusing. The reason is that you can split areas, close them, and change what each area shows. Here's how it works. The top left symbol in every area sets what this area shows. If I don't want the timeline, I can select something else. Maybe I want the info panel here. This shows you log messages. Or maybe I also want a new area. You can split an area by moving the mouse to the corner of that area. Then the cursor will change to such a crosshair, and from there you can click and drag out a new area. Maybe I want the asset browser over here. The asset browser is a catalog where you can store your own assets for reuse. We will do that in a later video. If you want to change the size of an area, hover over the edge between two areas and your cursor changes to a double arrow. Left-click and drag to resize. Right-click on such an edge and you get the option to split or join areas. You can also use the View menu, if that area has one, and choose Close Area over here. As a modder, you'll almost always want the default layout. The 3D viewport in the center, the outliner top right, properties bottom right. If you ever mess up your layout, go to File, Defaults, and Load Factory Settings to reset everything. But be aware, this will also reset your preferences. In Blender, you work in different modes. The two most important ones for modding are the Object mode and Edit mode. You can see the mode here at the top left of the viewport. What we did so far was all in Object mode. Here you work with whole objects. You move them, you rotate them, scale them, and organize them. These operations correspond to what you can also do in the Giants editor. Maybe with less options there, but for example, you could build the table we just created with primitive shapes also in the Giants editor. But what the Giants editor is not capable of is the Edit mode. Here, you make changes within a shape. It's like the Edit mode is one level deeper. You're now working with the actual vertices, edges, and faces that make up the mesh. This is the part which you cannot do in the Giants editor. Press Tab to switch between Object and Edit mode. You will immediately see that your object looks different. And the Edit mode has 3 sub-modes. By default, we are in Vertex mode. You can see that in the 3 small buttons here next to the Edit mode. In Vertex mode, you work with the vertices, namely the points that form the corners of your mesh. Now all vertices are selected. If I unselect them, I can select a single vertex, or I can drag a box around a few of them, and I can also move them by pressing G and Z, for example. You have all the options you had in object mode, and even more. But here we are working with parts of the mesh and not the whole mesh. The second mode, which you can activate by pressing 2 on the keyboard, or by clicking the small button over here, is the edge mode. Notice how the small cubes for the vertices in the corners have disappeared, and the edges are highlighted instead. When I scale an edge with S, the whole edge gets scaled, and the vertices and faces around it change accordingly. The third mode, which you can access with 3, is the face mode. Here you work with the surfaces of your mesh. For example, you can rotate a face with R, and then the mesh around the rotated face will also change accordingly. If you look at the toolbar in the edit mode, you see that you have the same entries in the upper part of the toolbar, but a lot more tools further down. These tools will be part of the next video, where we will go into a lot more detail of the edit mode. Some of them you will use constantly when working on models. Make sure you are subscribed to my channel so that you don't miss this. But one thing I still want to say about the edit mode. When you create a new shape in edit mode, it looks exactly the same as when creating a shape in object mode. But the difference here is that this shape becomes part of this object, even if it isn't connected to the other shape. See? If I select this one, in object mode, both get selected. This is all one object. So, when do I use which? Generally, if an object never changes or moves, it can be all in one object. Moving parts definitely need to be separate objects. But also for non-moving parts, you might consider having more than one shape for reusability or ease of work. The general rule for this could be to have as less objects as possible, but as many as necessary. But you also don't have to worry too much about it. It's not a permanent decision. It can be changed. You can separate a part of a mesh into a separate object, and you can also join different meshes together in one object. Mostly, you also won't use this building block-like building style we use today in the object mode, but do it in a different way. So stay tuned. That is a lot of object mode and edit mode in one go. Don't worry if it feels a lot right now. Go on and try things out on your own so you get a feeling for it. All right, let's do a quick recap. Today you installed Blender. You know the 3 main areas of the interface, the viewport, the outliner, and the properties panel. And you know how to customize your layout. You know that Blender uses Z as the vertical axis, not Y like the Giants editor. You can navigate the viewport, you can use the tools on the toolbar, and you also know the correlating keyboard shortcuts. You understand the difference between object mode and edit mode. You can transform and duplicate objects and mesh elements with G, R, and S, and you know why apply scale matters. That's a solid foundation. Everything else we do in this series builds on this. In the next episode, we are going to go much deeper into edit mode and the actual mesh editing tools like extrude, inset, loop cut, and more. We will build something real. If you have any questions about what we covered today, drop them in the comments. I read everything. And if this was helpful, it would mean a lot if you hit the like button and subscribe. It helps the channel grow and makes sure you don't miss the next episode. Don't be a stranger. See you next time.